Good evening. My name is Lynn Jones. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a 16-year-old human rights activist. Next slide, please.
Yes.
I'm sorry, go one more.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. I currently live in the Richmond area, but I'm actually from Anna, Texas. My family and I lived on a farm where we raised goats, chickens, and ducks. So I know it's very Texan of us, and we moved to Virginia this past summer. But before thank you. But before I continue introducing myself, I want to do a little thinking exercise. Next slide, please. What do we think of this photo? What might be my relationship to this woman? I'll take a few hands. Yes?
Hey, girlfriend.
Okay. Any other?
Best friend.
Okay.
Mother.
Okay. I'm going to ask you not to respond out loud to this next slide. How does the addition of these photos affect your perception? Next slide, please. I'm sure there are a flurry of assumptions throughout the room. What if I told you that this woman, next slide, please, is my mother? Okay. I'm sure many of you didn't think that initially and might even be failing to understand it now. And I can't say that I'm surprised. Unfortunately, I'm always prepared to be misunderstood, have to explain our relationship, and even after explaining, not be accepted. It's as if people's brains short circuit from misunderstanding to invalidation. Next slide, please. You see, society has confused the action of acceptance with the complexities of understanding, which has left us with a culture plagued by prejudice. But thankfully, understanding and acceptance are completely different things, and we can have one without the other. Take, for example, when you ask the new neighbor, who speaks little English and doesn't look American, where they're from, and they respond with one of the 50 states instead of some foreign country you were unconsciously predicting. You might not understand their response, but you can accept it. We commonly see this response followed up with something along the lines of, well, where are you really from? A question asked out of a desire to understand instead of a willingness to accept. A question that, despite its curious nature, makes others feel judged. Or another scenario is one I often face with my mom. Whenever we are together at school events or I post a photo of us online, people always ask me, oh, who's that? And I get it. We don't look alike. So I simply reply, she's my mom. But I've grown all too familiar to a particular follow-up question. Well, who's your real mom? Yet again, a question asked out of a desire to understand instead of the willingness to accept. A question that, despite its curious nature, makes us feel judged. And I know most people mean well and are just genuinely curious. But there is never a point where the want to understand becomes more important than others' sense of acceptance.
Right.
Another example of where this theory applies is in interactions between generations. My generation, Gen Z, is widely considered the most diverse and progressive, which has resulted in a culture that not only celebrates diversity, but also has a lot of new ideas about how to make our communities more inclusive. But when we attempt to exchange those ideas with older generations, they're often misunderstood, resulting in a point of conflict. But as we've learned, misunderstanding isn't really the problem. And I've come here to discuss this matter because the CCDC comprises a predominantly older demographic, a demographic that has fallen victim to this generational disconnect, a demographic that has become so quick to dismiss newer, more progressive ideologies due to a lack of understanding. Right now, the generational gap is small, and it can be bridged. But in order for that to happen, we need people from the older generation, especially those with political leverage, to not necessarily understand us, but accept us. Sure, understanding is the long-term goal, but what we need now is immediate action. With Republicans taking the majority in both the House and Senate, Trump as president and Youngkin as our governor, now is not the time for internal conflicts. What we need now is a diverse and unified community because despite the rhetoric being preached by the Republican Party, there is strength in diversity. So, what I ask of you all, what I ask of the officers, and what I ask of the executive committee leaders is to simply choose acceptance, even in the absence of understanding. Accept the voices of younger generations because although we are young, we are the next wave of leaders and our voices have value. Accept people from all backgrounds. Accept people from all backgrounds into your spaces, not with a sense of tolerance, but with a desire to include. Accept those who you don't understand because your acceptance has the power to make others feel understood. The problem is not when we fail to understand, it is when we fail to accept. Acceptance is what will bridge our generational gap, and acceptance is what will make the CCDC a more diverse and welcoming environment. Next slide, please. Now, I'll get back to my introduction while we let that first point kind of sink in. I come from a family of 8. I have 2 moms, and I'm the second oldest of 6 kids. Next slide, please. I began making my name as an activist my freshman year when I organized a school-wide walkout following a local mass shooting to advocate for stricter firearm regulations. Then, after the walkout, I still felt like I had more to do, for lack of better word. As I was brainstorming how I could continue advocating, I came across blogging. And it just made sense to me. It was something I could do at just 15 years old. I knew I was a strong writer, and it allowed me to use my voice and knowledge to spread awareness about the socio-political issues around me. That's when I founded the Changemakers Diary. Next slide, please.
The Changemakers Diary.
The Changemakers Diary. Sorry, I need school, are y'all? A little bit nervous. The Changemakers Diary is a platform I created to document my activism journey, and I think my tagline does a wonderful job at summarizing my mission. Don't wait for change. Be the change maker. That is the attitude I employed organizing my first walkout, speaking at the state capitol earlier this year, and even now as I speak to all of you. But moreover, it is the attitude that I wish to see from all the community leaders before me. Don't wait for change. Be the change maker. Speaking of change, sorry, please, let's address the elephant in the house. I'm going to presume that we all read the news and don't need a complete breakdown on all of Trump and the Republican Party's recent actions, but there is one in particular we need to discuss: the attack on DEI initiatives. But before we dive in, what does DEI even mean? So Tuesday night, I'm sure we've all had long days, so instead of boring you with definitions, I invite you to dinner. Slide, please. Welcome to DEI dinner. DEI is an acronym, but sometimes the use of acronyms can cause a disconnect from actual meaning. So let's break it down. In dinner terms, of course. Slide, please. Diversity means inviting our family and friends over for the meal and having a variety of identities gathered around our table. Equity is adding a leaf to extend our table and getting enough chairs to ensure that everyone has a spot. Inclusion means making enough foods and foods that meet any dietary restrictions so that everyone can enjoy the meal together. Inviting people over, extending the table, and preparing proper foods aren't anything extraneous when it comes to hosting a dinner. In fact, they're the standard. And the same is true about the institution of DEI policies in our spaces. They are nothing extra and should be the standard. Slide, please. DEI does not mean straight white men and women's jobs are being targeted. It does not mean hiring unqualified non-white employees simply to meet a quota. It is not reverse racism, nor is it giving one applicant an upper hand over another. DEI is simply stating that discrimination has no place in our spaces, and we commit to allowing diversity and equal opportunity to thrive. And let's be real. Considering all of the systemic racism and prejudice towards minorities that has so long prevailed in our nation, DEI is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
African Americans experience twice the unemployment rate than that of Caucasians. Queer people face significantly higher unemployment rates than their straight counterparts. The gender pay gap is still sitting around 10 to 15 cents per dollar, and countless other minorities are facing prejudice in the workplace every day. So agreeing to diversity, equity, and inclusion is the very least we can do. But at what point does the CCDC stop at the bare minimum when it comes to social justice? Let me tell you, we don't. That is not what Democrats do, nor is it beneficial to advancing equality in our communities, which is why we must go beyond. Simply having DEI initiatives in our spaces is step one. And yes, the first step is important. But of even greater importance are the steps you take personally to continue to benefit your anti-racism knowledge and facilitate more positive interactions with diverse groups of people. Now, I have an introspective question for you all, and I really want you to be honest with yourself. What are you doing personally to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond the minimum? Next slide, please. If your answer was nothing or close to nothing, I implore you to, number one, prioritize DEI trainings. Two, expose yourself to unfamiliar environments to become more educated on a variety of people and their ideologies. Three, do your own research if you have specific questions. And altogether, seek out opportunities that will benefit your interactions with diverse groups of people. And the very best way to go beyond the minimum is to simply, slide please, expand your table, just as we did at our DEI dinner a few moments ago. Pull up a chair for an unfamiliar face. Ask them what you can do to make your space more inclusive for them. How can you help? Be aware of how your comments may affect them. Although you probably don't mean to be offensive, are you committing microaggressions that push people away? And I want to focus more on that point for just a moment. Slide, please. Microaggressions are indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. They are also perhaps the most frequent form of discrimination because, from my experience at least, they usually aren't due to outright racism, sexism, or any other sort of prejudice, but rather a lack of awareness. I'll use myself as an example. One day, as I was talking with my mom, I was complaining about how gross and greasy my unwashed hair was. At that point, she corrected my comment and informed me that it was insensitive to call greasy hair gross, or use greasy as a negative term. Grease is a common product for curly and coily hair, but because it is predominantly used by people of color, the term greasy has had a historically negative context. Now, I am not racist. I would never intentionally make a negative comment about a person of color or anyone for that matter's hair. But what I said was insensitive, and I committed a microaggression. When my mother corrected me, I did two things: apologize and apply. I apologized for my comment, even though I didn't mean to be insensitive, because regardless of how I meant it, she was offended. Then I applied the correction she offered and continued to ensure that I educate others when I see a similar situation arise. Through educating ourselves on a diverse range of communities, which, by the way, a great place to learn is DEI training, apologizing when we say or do something insensitive, and applying corrections, we can put an end to microaggressions and make our spaces more welcoming. Okay, I know that I've thrown a lot at you today, and I promise it is not because I'm just some angry teenager who enjoys yelling at the CCDC in my free time, but because I want to ensure that the next wave of voters are on our side. Next slide, please. According to a study conducted by Pew Research Center, 1 in 4 Gen Zers are Hispanic, 14% are Black, 6% are Asian, and 5% are some other race or 2 or more races. Another study by the Public Religion Research Institute reports that 30% of Gen Z adults identify as queer, making this the nation's most diverse generation yet. Which is exactly why it is imperative that we are adapting our spaces to be inclusive for younger, more diverse members. Almost all of Gen Z will be eligible to vote in the 2028 election. But if democratic organizations such as the CCDC are not accepting of our ideas, we don't want it. If community leaders are not making an effort to not only support DEI, but go beyond the minimum, we don't want it. If people are being subject to microaggressions or even blatant acts of discrimination by other members, we don't want it. What we want is a community that chooses acceptance, even in the absence of understanding. What we want are spaces that are making progress in DEI initiatives and putting an end to microaggressions. What we want is to see our diversity being embraced and celebrated, not just tolerated. You are not helpless to this cause. You have resources. You have the internet. You have libraries. You have museums and even social media. But your resources are useless until you give them purpose. Hold yourselves accountable and take charge of your own progress. Attend DEI training. Seek out answers to your questions before something you say or do becomes a microaggression. And never, ever, ever make excuses. The younger generations do not care that you say or do offensive things because that's just how you were raised. We do not care that you don't always understand our ideologies because all that we ask for is your acceptance. We don't care about any excuse you have to dismiss your inability to progress. All that we care about is seeing our community take the initiative to make the CCDC a more welcoming space. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Lynn Jones. For anyone wanting more information about me, I have a couple cards, so make sure to come grab those afterwards. Thank you for having me.